Hey guys, welcome to the video. Salt here. Today I'll be going over the Warframe Gara Prime. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm an LR5 with over 6,000 hours in Warframe, and my goal is to provide builds and guides for people to have an easier time in the game. Now, this is actually my second video for Gara Prime, but I wanted to redo her since the rework to pseudo-exalted weapons happened. Okay, let's talk about her abilities first. Her passive is that casting her abilities has a chance to radial blind enemies around her for 10 seconds. Her 1 is Shattered Lash. This is also her newly moddable pseudo-exalted weapon. There are two ways to cast this. Tapping the ability will thrust it forward, dealing puncture damage and knockback, and holding the ability will sweep it from left to right in an arc in front of Gara, dealing slash damage and putting enemies in a ragdolled state. We haven't gone over Gara's 4 yet, but casting Shattered Lash on her 4's glass wall will cause it to explode and deal damage. This used to be how our old Gara would function, but our new build no longer needs to do this synergy. Gara's 2 is Splinter Storm. This can be self-cast, targeted on an ally or defense target, or targeted on an enemy. This causes the target to be surrounded by glass shards that do damage per second to enemies, and if cast on the enemy will also make the enemy more vulnerable to damage. If cast on self or an ally, you'll receive up to 90% damage reduction that works on both health and shields. If cast on defense targets, they get up to the 50% damage reduction max. Now both Gara's 3 and 4 can increase the damage per second of Splinter Storm. The 3 if a mirror was destroyed within the Splinter Storm's radius, and the 4 if her 1 was used to break the glass wall and her 2 was within the explosion radius. Now once again, our build used to utilize these synergies, but our new build does not need to anymore. We will be using the 2 for the 90% damage reduction it provides primarily. Gara's 3 is Spectral Rage. She summons a spinning circle of mirrors, enticing nearby enemies to enter the circle and attack a mirror. Once a mirror receives enough damage, it will break, damaging the enemy, and once enough mirrors have been broken, the entire mirror circle will collapse in an explosion. Gara's 4 is Mass Vitrify. Pressing 4 creates a ring of expanding glass, and pressing 4 again will stop the expansion and create the glass wall. While the ring is still expanding, enemies touched by it will be crystallized in place and become vulnerable to damage. Each crystallized enemy will also add more health to the glass wall, depending on their max shields and health. When you decide to stop the expansion by pressing the 4 again, it will create the glass wall. The glass wall has 12 different segments with their own HP pools. Gara's armor also contributes to the glass wall's total health, and each segment can be broken individually, and on breaking will explode outwards, dealing damage. The subsume ability we're going to be using is Kalervo's Wrathful Advance. This adds final critical chance values to Gara's 1. I want to mention that I tested 2 other abilities up against Wrathful Advance. I used a baseline build where Gara had 0 mods on, but her pseudo-exalt was modded out minus the status mods, but still including our melee exposure arcane. No priming was done for these tests other than what her 1 already produces, plus the corrosive from melee exposure. These were also done at ×12 combo and with a fully stacked melee exposure. Wrathful Advance was 500 to 600k damage per hit. Roar was 400 to 700k damage per hit, and Evade was 300k damage per hit. Firstly, I wanted to see if stealth multipliers from Evade would work. The wiki says Gara's 1 can't benefit from them, but I wanted to check anyway because of the recent rework. Roar surprisingly got the highest damage numbers in the 700,000s, but seems to be teetering on the edge of 200% crit chance, as the orange crits from Roar were doing in the 700,000s, much more than Wrathful Advance, but the yellow crits were much less in the 4 to 500s. And there also seemed to be way more yellow crits than there were orange crits. Wrathful Advanced produced numbers consistently in the 500 to 600,000s. And so for that reason, we will be using Wrathful Advance as our subsume. Now the question does come to where to put it. What do we subsume over? And it will either be the 3 or the 4. Our new playstyle with Gara doesn't really utilize either of these, although between the two, I think the 4 is the best to subsume over, because you could still cast the 3 for some crowd control and some extra damage at least. And the 3 also has a good augment that our build doesn't specifically use, but you could definitely make room for it if you like it. Alright, I think we can go over the mods now. Umbral Vitality and Umbral Intensify first for health and ability strength. Primed Continuity for duration. Primed Flow for a larger energy pool. Blind Rage for ability strength. Equilibrium for more energy and healing. Stretch for ability range. Now please note that this should be Archon Stretch if you really want to min-max for more energy. But Archon Stretch will require you to spend 1 Umbral Forma to fit it, so that's really up to you. Overextended for more ability range. In the Aura slot, we use Steel Charge for more melee damage. In the Exiles slot, you can either go for Cunning Drift for 15% more range, or Power Drift for 15% more strength. I would probably say Power Drift is probably a little bit better. I personally used Cunning Drift because I have a little bit of OCD, and Cunning Drift moves my one's range to exactly 30 meters, which that makes my OCD happy. In the Arcane slots, we have Molt Augmented for 60% ability strength, and then Arcane Blessing for about 1,200 more HP. For a proper damage reduction build, you do want at least 2,000 health, so Blessing takes us the rest of the way to it. Okay, let's go over her new moddable Pseudo-Exalt, the Shattered Lash Prime. Condition Overload for flat damage. Galvanized Steel for critical chance and critical damage. Galvanized Elementalist, which will combo with our element choice. Gladiator Might for critical chance and critical damage. And now for our elements, we have a few options. Gas or Blast will be for the most damage. Gas if you choose melee exposure as your arcane, or Blast if you choose melee afflictions as the arcane. The last element option for these two slots would be Magnetic for possibly better scaling against overguarded enemies, but I personally don't think it's really needed. Now, as you can see here, I have chosen to go with Gas with the Primed Fever Strike and mixing it with Volcanic Edge to make Gas, and that's because I'm going with the melee exposure arcane. Blood Rush for 440% crit chance, and Weeping Wounds for 440% status chance. In the arcane slot, we have 3 good choices here. Exposure gives you a 240% corrosive buff. This is powerful, but it also overweights your weapon into corrosive, meaning that you really need to use an element on the weapon that can compete with that large corrosive number, which is why you go Gas in this scenario, since Gas can use the 60/60 heat and the primed toxin mod to increase its weighting. Afflictions is also a great choice. This can give you 6 additional stacks of an element when enemies are flung by melee attacks, which always happens. And this pairs well with the Blast status that uses 2 60/60s. And then finally, Melee Influence. Let me find it here. There it is. This spreads statuses and does damage in a wide area. Now, personally for me, I'll be going for exposure with using Gas on the weapon, but any of these setups are viable. Now let's go over our stat stick for Wrathful Advance. Now there's 2 ways to cast Wrathful Advance. Tap casting will make you do a heavy attack with your equipped melee, and holding to cast will teleport you to that location. Both of these still provide the same buff. But let's try to make tap casting Wrathful Advance more worth it. The weapon you pick will depend on what you want to do exactly. For some extra damage, the Zenistar's heavy attack creates a disc that lasts for 10 seconds, giving it the best potential for extra damage. The Sancti Magistar does group heals on heavy attacks. Zaws have a Zaw-specific arcane that regens energy on heavy attack kills. And of course, the ones that a lot of people know already is the Praetos Incarnate increases parkour speed passively, and the Bow, Anku, and Okina Incarnates will increase movement speed passively. Now, personally, I'm going to be picking the Zaw for more energy regen, but know that any of these stat stick choices will be built out the exact same. Okay, let's go over the mods now. Galvanize Reflex and Corrupt Charge give us enough initial combo to where in normal gameplay, just refreshing Wrathful Advance normally, we can usually sit at about 6 to 7 times combo without even needing to use the weapon normally. Condition Overload for flat damage. Galvanized Steel for crit chance and crit damage. Gladiator Might for crit chance and crit damage. Organ Shatter for crit damage. Life Strike will basically just full heal us anytime we refresh Wrathful Advance. Prime Fever Strike is added just to add more element on the weapon. The stance doesn't matter since we're not going to be using this weapon normally. Dispatch Overdrive will give you a 60% movement buff for 15 seconds every time you refresh Wrathful Advance. And Exodia Brave will give you a stacking energy regen buff if your Wrathful Advance kills anything on refreshing it. Of course, this one is Zaw specific, so if you didn't pick a Zaw as your stat stick, you wouldn't have this one. And for our arcanes, regular arcanes, I personally just like to use melee exposure for more raw damage, but also consider melee vortex. Let me bring this up here. So melee vortex would be used to group enemies. Of course, to use melee vortex, you also are gonna want to add magnetic on the weapon probably as well. All right, that is the bulk of the build done, but I still want to go over some optional externals for the build, starting with Archon Shards. Now, I like to use 1 yellow for effectiveness on energy orbs, and 4 purples for melee critical damage. Next is the primary slot. So our pet is going to be doing the bulk of the melee status priming for us, but it's still good if you help him out. The best ranged primer is widely accepted as the Compressa or the Epitaph, but unfortunately, those are both secondaries and we want to be able to use the Grimoire in our secondary slot. And so for that reason, we choose the Ceto Prime as our primary to help our pet with melee priming. So what the Ceto Prime does is its alternate fire shoots out this little disc that bounces around. Things it hit, it produces all 4 of the single elements as well as whatever you mod for on it. I suggest either viral or both viral and magnetic. That way you have viral, magnetic, and 4 of the basic elements. In the secondary slot, we use the Grimoire. You can build this out for 60% more strength, 60% more duration, or just as an energy generator. Now, since Gara is such an ability spammer, I like using it with Zada Invocation, which is going to be the energy generator way to build out the Grimoire. For the melee, we already went over it. The Focus School is going to be Naramon to reduce your melee combo decay. The Shattered Lash Prime, we already went over. So now the pet. We want a melee priming pet, so that means either Dirija, Nautilus, or the Mechanical Hound. Now, Dirija and Nautilus are better at melee priming than the Hound is, but those two only prime within melee range, whereas the Hound can shoot his synergized prospectus out and it can bounce around, so it's better at priming for range. And with our setup, our one has 30 meters of range, meaning the Mechanical Hound is our choice here. I'm going to briefly show his build. That way you can copy it if you want. I also have a video out on him already, so if you want to kind of see him in more detail, you can always take a gander at that video. This is how you build out Gara Prime. I hope you guys liked it, and if you did, consider leaving a like or subscribing for future content. And so I'll leave you with about 5 minutes of gameplay showcasing the build. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have an amazing day. All right, bye.